The greatest vampire slayer in history wasn't born with a stake in his hand. He was forged in a London library. Welcome to Hidden Mythology, where folklore meets film lore and legends come alive. Tonight, we unravel the myth, the man, the monster hunter, Professor Abraham Van Helsing. And by the end, you'll see why every modern vampire's downfall begins with him. Van Helsing wasn't plucked from medieval superstition. He sprang from Bram Stoker's fever-charged imagination in 1897. Stoker devoured medical journals on blood diseases, pamphlets on mesmerism, and traveler accounts of Eastern European folklore, while moonlighting as a theater manager. In his notebooks, you can spot scribbles about Nosferatu, staking, and wild garlic, nestled right next to cutting-edge germ theory clippings. Out of that collision of science and superstition, Stoker forged a character who could wield both. Even his name hints at scholarly gravity. Helsing likely nods to the Dutch city of the same name and to 17th century alchemist Jan Baptist van Helmont. On the page, Van Helsing is 5'5", middle-aged, endlessly polite, yet never hesitates to hammer a stake through a friend's heart to save her soul. He peppers his speech with Latin, tears up over lost innocence, and still finds the backbone to face down ancient evil. Let's retrace his playbook against Count Dracula, step by step. First, careful diagnosis. Tiny punctures on Lucy Westenra's neck, a sudden anemia no Victorian doctor could explain. Second, data gathering. Letters, journals, phonograph recordings, even madhouse transcripts, and early modern research sprint a century ahead of its time. Third, a cross-disciplinary arsenal. Medicine, folklore, Catholic sacrament, hypnotism, whatever works. Fourth, collaboration. He recruits a 6-person crew because Van Helsing knows evil is seldom beaten solo. Fifth, empathy. After staking the undead Lucy, he weeps beside her coffin. Proof that righteousness can mourn even while it acts. Beneath that story beats a larger theme, science squaring off against the supernatural. Victorian England was reeling as germ theory cracked long-held certainties about sin, sickness, and the soul. Van Helsing straddles both worlds, a physician with a microscope in one hand and consecrated wafers in the other. When he seals doorways with holy bread, he's performing a living experiment, testing faith against physics and proving that maybe, just maybe, both can be true. Pop culture couldn't resist a figure like that, so the professor kept evolving. In 1931, Edward Van Sloan played him as a stoic, white-haired scholar, your grandfather's vampire hunter. Hammer Films turned him athletic and swashbuckling under Peter Cushing. You might call it parkour before parkour. Hugh Jackman's 2004 Van Helsing recast him as an amnesiac secret agent with a rapid-fire crossbow. Critics balked. Cosplay communities boomed. Television and anime spun fresh shapes. Penny Dreadful's weary savant, Helsing Ultimate's gender-flipped Integra. Comics and games pull him into team-ups with everyone from Mr. Hyde to Blade. The surname, Helsing, now stalks through more than 300 films, series, and games, outnumbering cinematic Draculas by a hefty margin. Because Van Helsing lets us fantasize that knowledge itself is a weapon. He's Batman with a PhD, proof you can beat back darkness by reading. Time to bust a few persistent myths. First, that Van Helsing was modeled on some medieval vampire hunter, like Vlad the Impaler false. Stoker's early notes label the character Dr. M and Vanry, shifting shapes until the final Dutch moniker clicked. Second, that he only fights Dracula hardly. Extended lore pits him against werewolves, Mr. Hyde, even Jack the Ripper when writers need a brainy badass on speed dial. Third, that garlic is his #1 weapon wrong again. In the novel, he trusts consecrated host far more. Garlic is a stopgap that ultimately fails Lucy. So why does this myth still matter? Because as long as humans fear the unknown plagues, AI taxes our imaginations will spawn monsters. And as long as we yearn to understand those fears, We will conjure Van Helsings, curious hearts armed with reason, flashlights aimed into the abyss. He reminds us that bravery can wear spectacles, that compassion can lift a hammer, and that the sharpest stake is often the one carved from knowledge. Feeling the thrill of the hunt? Then sink your fangs into our deep dive on Dracula, already lurking on this channel. Click over and watch the Count's crimson tapestry unfold if you dare.